What's going on, you guys? My name's Ty Knotts, and welcome to Top 5 Unknowns, 5 Disturbing Camping Stories. Number 5. Dennis Martin was a 7-year-old boy back in 1969 when he went camping with his family. Dennis was known to have been mentally disabled, so he was far behind other children in terms of intelligence. During the trip, Dennis's older brother Douglas went a short distance away from the family's camp to play with 2 other boys, though he remained within eyesight of the family, only being a few dozen yards away. It was at this time that Douglas devised a plan to scare his parents, telling Dennis that it would be funny if the boys split up into the woods, then jumped out to scare their parents. The boys agreed to this, and 3 of them went in one direction, with Dennis running in the other. Dennis's father, William, was able to see the entire event unfold from where he was sitting, though once the 3 boys reappeared from the woods, Dennis was nowhere to be seen. William was terrified by this point and ran into the woods calling his son's name, though he received no answer. He ran into the woods for upwards of 2 miles but never saw a single sign of Dennis. After his disappearance, a search was put into place, as documented in a 30-page report that was released by the National Park Service. From this report, we know that multiple families, friends, and park rangers helped search for Dennis during that night, though no one found any signs of him. Military special forces were also called in, but still found nothing. The story was then issued to the press, which helped gather 1,400 people to help look for Dennis, but still nothing. In spite of all this, Dennis was never seen again and his body has never been found. He still remains missing to this day, and if he's still alive, he's expected to be in his upper 50s. Number 4. In June of 1977, 3 girls named Michelle Goose, Lori Farmer, and Doris Milner were on a camping trip with their local Girl Scout branch in Oklahoma. However, on the first day of their camp, a massive thunderstorm hit, forcing the girls to remain either indoors or inside of their tents. It was on this same evening that the 3 previously mentioned girls went missing. Their bodies were found a short while later after they'd been sexually assaulted, beaten, then strangled and stuffed back into their sleeping bags. All of the girls had passed away by the time they were discovered. A man by the name of Gene Hart was eventually charged for this crime. He was known to have been an escaped convict who had been in the area since around 1973 and was known to have grown up around the camp. In the years prior, he had also been arrested for kidnapping and assaulting 2 pregnant women, as well as charges for theft. Gene was sent to trial for his possible involvement in the crimes committed against these girls, though there wasn't enough evidence to properly convict him. Though he still went to prison for unrelated charges just a short while later, where he ultimately passed away at the age of 35. Exactly 30 years later, in 2007, further research was conducted on the evidence that was obtained by the police on the night of the girls' passing, which revealed a bit of DNA that had been previously overlooked. The DNA was run through a police database, though it was degraded too much over time to properly identify the suspect. To this day, the Girl Scout mystery remains unsolved. Number 3. At around 8 a.m. on August 20th, 2004, a young boy named Garrett Bardsley and his father Kevin decided to go on a father-son camping trip in the mountains of Summit County, Utah. The 2 left home very early that morning and went fishing at a nearby lake. However, Garrett got a bit too close to the water and his feet slipped in. He then decided to head back to the campsite for a fresh pair of socks and shoes. The tents at which the 2 were staying were only about 400 feet away, so Kevin allowed the 12-year-old boy to walk back on his own. This is a path that the 2 had taken many times before, and therefore Kevin and Garrett both felt quite confident. Though Kevin still kept his eye on Garrett just to make sure he was safe. But after Garrett left, about 20 minutes passed and he had still not returned. Kevin couldn't understand what would possibly be taking this long and headed back to the camp as well, though by this point Garrett was gone. Appropriate authorities were then contacted and a search began for Garrett. Eventually, one of Garrett's socks was found in a field about a half-mile away from the campsite, but there were no other signs of the boy. Garrett was known to have passed survival courses prior to embarking on this camping trip, though the day that he went missing was exceptionally cold and the terrain was quite rough and unpredictable. Police say that they have no reason to believe that he was kidnapped or that there was any foul play whatsoever. The most likely theory is that he likely became lost on his way back from the camp and passed away due to the cold, winds, and rain.
A group of 30 BYU students spent their Saturday as part of the volunteer search effort for Garrett Bardsley. Bardsley disappeared on a camping trip March 20th with nothing but a fishing pole and the wet clothes he was wearing. Student volunteers wanted to help out any way they could to help bring some solace and some peace to the Bardsley family.
Any clue could help bring answers to the family, then
right.
it'll bring some closure to the
Especially
case.
for the family, it probably brings hope to them that someone's trying to do something about it, because they don't know where their son is. So,
upon arriving at search headquarters, volunteers received quick instructions on what to look for and how to perform the search.
I've been right over to where he started, and you can walk 5 minutes from where he started, and you can't tell how to get back there.
Guided by GPS units and maps, search leaders spread the volunteers out into lines, and for nearly 6 hours looked and hiked through the rugged mountain landscape. After a long day of searching, volunteers, dressed in these orange jackets, return here to search headquarters, where they receive refreshments as well as an opportunity to meet the Bardsley family. Earlier in the week, at a donation presentation at Garrett's Middle School in Spanish Fork, Garrett's dad, Kevin Bardsley, expressed his appreciation to the volunteers.
We just want them to know that we appreciate everything that they're doing. It's ongoing.
The Bardsleys will continue searching for their son until the winter weather permits. Reporting from Summit County, Scott Madsen, Daily News.
Number 2. In November of 2014, a 20-year-old by the name of Thomas Geisford left his home in Britain, headed to Zimbabwe to explore Mount Nangani. This because he had won a college contest that allowed students to receive school funding for a trip of their choosing in a remote area. The contest was intended to build self-confidence. Thomas's plan was to head out to the mountain, spend the night at the mountain summit, then head back the following day. However, at around 3 a.m., Thomas said that an extremely thick fog began to engulf his surroundings, leaving him confused and lost. Shortly after this had begun, rain also began to fall. Rather than continue on, Thomas simply pitched his tent where he was and decided to wait for the sun to rise the following morning before continuing on. Though as the night went on, Thomas claims to have been observed by numerous creatures that surrounded his campsite, simply staring at him. In fact, prior to actually embarking on this trip, Thomas had been warned by locals of strange creatures that were, quote, not of this world. For the next 10 hours, Thomas lay in his tent, petrified of whatever these creatures truly were, simply waiting for the sun to rise so that he could continue his journey. Thankfully, the following day, he did just that, though no one was ever able to explain what these creatures were. Some insist that Thomas had likely become dehydrated and was simply imagining things, though others say that the creatures may have been from an alternate dimension and passed through by means of a dimensional portal or tear that was presumed to have been on the top of this mountain. To this day, these creatures' origins are unknown. Number 1. In September of 1974, Richard and Belinda Cowden, along with their 2 young sons, headed out on a camping trip to the mountains of California. The trip was only expected to last for a short time, with the family planning on having dinner with Belinda's mother that evening. However, when the family never showed up, Belinda decided to head to the family's campsite to make sure that they were okay. Once she arrived, she noticed that none of the family members were there. She then found a decent amount of cash, a wallet, and a baby's diaper bag still at the campsite. With no sign of the family, Belinda phoned police, who then helped her search for them, though they found no trace of them aside from the items at their campsite. Though 2 months later, a group of hikers were on a trip in a similar area of the mountains and stumbled across the remains of the entire family. Everyone except Richard had obvious signs of gunshot wounds, yet there was no gun at the scene of the crime. Richard's passing was never fully explained, and police believe that Richard very likely didn't commit this act himself. Over 40 years later, police have still found virtually no leads as to who took the lives of this entire family, though a man by the name of Dwayne Lee Little was at the campsite around the same time as the family, and had been incarcerated for a similar crime years prior. At the time of the family's disappearance, Dwayne had been imprisoned for the assault of a 16-year-old girl, and was known to have been in possession of the same type of firearm that took the lives of the Cowden family, though they still had no evidence that he was actually the criminal in this situation. It's all simply speculation. Police say that the evidence that they do have has become so degraded and that the investigation was, quote, botched back in the 70s, so there will likely be no definitive answer as to who took the lives of this innocent family. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you like this video, be sure to click that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep updated with our videos.